Hello. Hello.
Sunday night, cold.
It is. That's because it's late October, Charles. It's fairly damn obvious, I think.
Yep, two jumpers, scarf. No heating on in this house yet.
No. This is Victorian Britain. You don't have heating on until it gets minus temperatures.
The new Victorian.
Yeah, the new Victorian. Welcome to the new Victorian Britain.
Well, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
But I have an early interruption, Charles.
Go,
It's quite
interrupt
it's quite
Graham.
important.
Yeah.
You know how you haven't. You know these days all windy weather leads to storm warning across Britain, which we take very seriously. And we've just had Storm Babette, which has had some serious consequences. People have been killed and
Yeah.
been made homeless. So I'm not belittling the actual storm, but this is a warning of a different nature, which people in general won't take too seriously, but I take it very seriously. I'd just like to warn that coming up on December the 2nd and the 3rd is the chance to experience a magical cinematic spectacular only in cinemas, packed with chandeliers, candelabras, ice rinks, snow, everything you could possibly get this Christmassy. And the problem is, it's actually my favorite Viennese violinist.
It wouldn't be Andre Rio.
So I'm just warning people, like, stay away from the cinema on December 2nd and 3rd because he's going to be on with these White Christmas cinematic, snow-capped, annoyingly rich in sweet, spectacular.
There are some success stories that I just think, why? And he's one of them. I just don't see any connection between a British audience and him. I can't get it. It's always smiling Viennese people having a whale of a time. I don't know what British people see in him.
I would agree, but if you remember back to the past, like back to the 60s and the 70s, the James Last Orchestra was very popular in Britain. And if you think about the 70s and 80s and 90s, Richard Clayderman, the pianist, was also very popular. And they were both very rich and sweet and fruity and obvious, and none of them were British, and yet they were still popular in Britain. So there obviously is an audience for this sort of thing.
Why?
That is a tricky question. I suppose some British people actually do like a fantasy world of, where everything's nicey-wicey and jolly and happy. I know it's very un-British to think like that, but there must be a minority of people actually
it's exactly
like to be positive.
I'm just not that positive. He's impossibly happy. That's what I find so irritating. He is impossibly happy all the time, despite playing an instrument that is notorious for not being happy.
It's like the whole world could be on a blaze and burning to the ground, and he would still be smiling and jigging away, and the audience would still be smiling and beaming in delight back at him. It's like
he'd be
fantasy
fiddler.
world.
He'd be fiddler on the aloof.
Oh, very good. Actually, that's good, Charles.
Yeah, that's shocked you, that one. It wasn't by my standards.
Hey,
not
I didn't
bad.
see that one coming. Very good.
Now, Graham, talking of people doing things in extreme climates, I'm not suggesting that recording amid Storm Babette is that, but nevertheless, you've met a man who is, well, that's kind of that's what he's doing all the time. You have met Sir Ranulph Fiennes, and Sir Ranulph has been to the Raworths, I should say, Harrogate Literature Festival. And he's been touring the same show for a little while now that's come to the various theatres, but this was obviously something a little bit different because he's come to the literary festival. So has he got a new book out?
He has indeed. It's about Lawrence of Arabia.
So that's a different. I mean, that's quite unexpected. That's interesting that he should be going off into that field.
Not entirely. He's done 31 amazing expeditions in his whole life, which has got him in the Guinness Book of Records as being the world's greatest living explorer. Exactly. Which I wouldn't argue with. No one would. But he's also written about 30 books, and we're talking like all sorts of books, fiction and non-fiction. And he's not only written about himself a lot in these various adventures and journeys, he's also written about classic past explorers And he's also written the history of the special services because he was in the SAS in the 1960s. And he's done biographies of Shackleton and Captain Scott. So he has got, for me, he's a legitimate best-selling author. So it's not that unexpected he would do Lawrence Arabia. But I met him because obviously the Harrogate Advertiser gets to interview, passing celebrities. So I was invited by Harrogate National Festival to organise Raworths Literature Festival to interview him in advance of the whole show. So it was just me and him. And being me, obviously talked about myself quite a lot, which Sir Ranulph loved. Sir Ranulph really warmed to that.
Remind me, Graham, which was the last mountain you climbed?
Well, I have actually, I've been in the Swiss Alps, I've been in the Canadian Rockies, I've been up Helvellyn in the Lake District, Ben Nevis. I've got, compared to Sir Ranulph, I haven't got any form.
Towering achievements there, Graham.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I can walk, so there's a tiny similarity between me and Sir Ranulph. And he was in the Royal Scots Greys as a soldier before he sort of had to join the SAS. So he kept on talking about Glaswegians and Scots. He seems to quite rate Scots in general because he's worked with them in a military capacity quite a lot, and he's had Scots in his expedition teams over the decades. So he kept on talking about that, and because he seemed to be quite proud of Scots, I told him that when I got married, I'd gone to see my favourite uncles in Scotland in advance of the wedding, and I'd been talking about the wedding. They said, "Well, you'll be wearing a kilt, Graham." I said, "No, I'm not really that sort of guy. I don't really like kilts, tartan and all that, Scottish biscuit tin stuff." And they went, "No, Graham, you'll be wearing a kilt." And I said, "Well, part of me would want to wear a kilt, but I don't think I'm going to wear a kilt." And then they said, "No, Graham, you'll be wearing a kilt, or we're not coming to the wedding." So I told him that story. He did laugh, but you could see him thinking like, who is this person in front of me talking about this stuff when I'm the world's greatest living explorer?
Did you end up going to his talk on Lawrence?
I did indeed, and it was very interesting because he's now 80, and I got some interesting answers about him before the show. But the difference between him off stage and on stage was massive. He behaved and talked like an 80-year-old when I was chatting to him. On stage, completely galvanized, completely focused, turned into showman with a great sense of humor. And I had been aware during the face-to-face interview that he's quite a deceptive person and very formidable. So, and he didn't answer. He was quite skillful at avoiding answering questions in general as well. And I thought, you're a guy who's quite complex with lots of layers, and that came out in the actual show itself. Because he was very entertaining.
Why would he not answer questions, Graham? Why would he not do that? I find that surprising. It's not that he had something to hide. So why would he not answer questions?
Well, I said to him that I'd given a talk recently on David Lean's film, The Bridge in the River Kwai.
Yeah.
And Lean also made the Lawrence Arabia movie, which is a fantastic movie. I said, but both those films, although they're great films, were anti-war films, and both of them were factually, not entirely accurate about the events either in the Second World War in Burma or in the First World War in our world, the Lawrence Arabia. I said, is your book about Lawrence Arabia, is it myth or is it legend or is it the facts? And I'm not sure he likes to talk about difficult questions. So he replied and said, when I'm asked that question, I usually say, yes, it was. Which obviously gets him. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? Because that's avoiding the. But to me, if you're looking at a starting point for this book, it has to be the man beyond the myth, the man beyond the legend, which is the figure that's very familiar. And partly, obviously, because of Peter O'Toole's performance and David Lean's direction in that film. But there's so much more of another story to tell there, and so surely he has to break through the myth and the legend. That is what you're wanting from this book. Yeah,
but I said to him, like, Lawrence himself described his actions in leading our revolt in the desert during the First World War against the Ottoman Empire and the Turks as being only a sideshow of a sideshow. So I said to Sir Ranulph, Lawrence himself wasn't sure he was important. And Sir Ranulph did say that he was a really complex man and that he couldn't possibly explain the inner workings of Lawrence's brain, which is a fair point to make. But he did say that he thought he was a really important man. He really admired him. And I think the book, which I haven't read yet, but I have got, portrays Lawrence generally as a hero. So I think Sir Ranulph is a military man from a long military family background. I think his dad and his granddad were both high up serving officers in the Royal Greys. I think he does look on Lawrence as not in a simplistic fashion, but he's not going to be one to undermine the legend, because I think he admires him a lot.
So, Graham, if you're going to choose between T.E. Lawrence and D.H. Lawrence when it comes to initials as the greatest figure of the two in significance in British history, which would it be?
See, here's the rub. D.H. is very important and significant because he represented the rise of the working class in British culture in the late Victorian era. And he sort of like was the harbinger of the 1960s, when Victorian Britain finally fell apart in terms of morality, culture, to the degree politics and wealth.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, he was a bit of a sort of like controversial character and maybe not likable, whereas there's something intrinsically romantic about Lawrence of Arabia and very quintessentially British. And the feeling I got talking to Sir Ranulph face to face was that Sir Ranulph himself could be a figure from the late 19th century or from Lawrence of Arabia's era himself. He's got the same British, slightly eccentric, maverick, gung-ho spirit, which, although he's very patriotic, he's also a bit of a, because he was in the SAS, he's a bit of a trickster. He's not entirely a straightforward person. And so I think it's very hard not to be. I think I'm more fascinated by Lawrence of Arabia than I am by D.H. Lawrence.
Interesting. That's an interesting answer to that, and I can see why. You hit on that thing of the romantic side of the figure, and that is something I think that we're always drawn to. I mean, the cultural significance obviously is D.H. Lawrence. He would have greater cultural significance in this country, I think, overall. We are still fascinated by T.E. Lawrence, but the great things of literature is that individuals read it down the ages and respond to it in different ways, and he's still having a huge impact as D.H. Lawrence. We still have versions made of his works, and his storytelling is persuasive and remarkable and groundbreaking when it happened, and still hugely influential now. So I'm going to go against you. I'm going with D.H. Lawrence.
I think you're entirely right, but against my better instincts, I can't stop being British, no matter how, in some ways, non-mainstream I am. I can't shake off that Britishness, which means that I also am fascinated by Scott of the Antarctic and Lawrence of Arabia, and I watch Ben Fogle programs. So I actually mentioned Ben Fogle to Sir Ralph to see if I got any erection from him. But yeah, it's very, very hard to wind up Sir Ranulph. He's an amazing character, a formidable, very, very intelligent, sharp man. So I was never going to win any arguments with Sir Ranulph.
No, so there you are. You lost out to Sir Ranulph. But on the other hand, Graham, you didn't have a fallout with him, which, in recent interviewing standards, that's got to be a plus point.
This is true, but I did try my best.
Now, Graham, last week, and we'll come on to a film section now, if we may, just going to finish off perhaps our discussion last week about Ken Loach. Just to remind listeners, last week we were talking about Ken Loach's potentially his last film. Ken is now 87, and the Old Oak has had pretty powerful reactions to it. But you did make the point, as I understood it, maybe not that he's sort of stuck in his ways, and so maybe that slightly diminishes the impact of his films, because though I think this run of last three films, Daniel Blake, sorry, we missed you, and now The Old Oak, I think are three of his strongest works. But you would make that point that not all his works have been great works, and there is that thing of maybe that the familiarity of material that runs through his films is something that actually runs against the impact of those films.
I always think that Ken Loach's films, that the best and strongest thing about them is the way he captures working class characters in a very natural way, in a natural setting. And he doesn't try and make them look like heroes or villains. They're like real people. And my first Ken Loach film I saw was when I was aged 8 at Grangemouth La Scala Cinema as part of a double bill with 1000 Plane Raid. Was the film Kes from 1969.
1969,
it wasn't 69 when I saw it, and I couldn't think. You couldn't think about a more inappropriate double bill than 1000 Plane Raid, a sort of gung ho Second World War British film, or with Kes. But Kes, even aged 8, had a massive impact on me.
Yes,
and Kes had no political angle and no political axe to grind. Really, it was more about how working class culture itself oppressed its own people because of the tough circumstances it was in. And I think most of his best films are just about people. And I'd never like his films so much when I can see the point he's trying to make. Although I'm not against him making points, it's perfectly fine. But it's a bit like he sometimes like hits you over the head with a point, and that's when I don't like it so much.
I mean, of recent acting for him, Paul Laverty, Dave Johns, who's a comedian, and Dave Turner, they are, if you like, actors next door. They are real. You make that, and it's an interesting point, isn't it? That sometimes maybe he can hammer at something too heavily, but I do think the way that he chooses it, and one is even loath to call them actors in some ways. He's very deliberate in how he chooses what feels real, and of course we know that the very nature of filmmaking, there is something artificial about it because it's film. But I think his great gift is to draw you into those stories, to make you think again about issues, to get angry maybe, to wish the world was different. And I think that will never leave him. And I know what you're saying, that sometimes maybe he's hammering up the point home, but I wonder whether that's part of the frustration about where is the subsequent generation of filmmakers that's doing what he has done? Where are the new voices making those points about the state of the nation? Why is it Ken that keeps having to make that point?
Well, you're talking about the nature of the British film industry then, and in fact, to go all Marxist on you, it's essentially a class-based system. So therefore, it's not going to make films which are too political in general, because the people in charge of making films don't really want films that are too political in general.
And that's
to get very political.
But that's to run counter to filmmaking, obviously, in the 1960s and 1970s, both in America and Great Britain, that was hugely political, and playwriting, hugely political. Isn't that the role of art, to challenge the status quo, to make us think differently, and to want to change things?
Yeah, but they challenge the status quo in different ways now. There's different topics, different themes that do challenge the status quo. What they don't do is they don't analyse modern politics or the modern economy. Those are the two things that very rarely get addressed, because those are the two most tricky, biggest, difficult subjects to address, and the two subjects which are likely to annoy the people who've got the money most of all. So the subject matter falls into certain camps which do challenge some things in society. It's not all British films are completely devoid of meaning or good intentions. It's not that bad.
No, I mean, Shane Meadows obviously would be a case in point, wouldn't he?
Although Shane's not very political, really. He doesn't really make political films. Although I know that you got This Is England series, which does make some points, but again, he's more character driven, and it's more about working class culture.
Well, there's our thoughts on Ken Loach, quite possibly his last film, which brings us to Martin Scorsese. Probably not his last film, but Martin has turned 80 and made a film 3 hours and 26 minutes long. Which
he doesn't make short films anymore. He's given up on that.
Did it feel like that when you watched it?
Not really. No, I was quite surprised, because I did expect it to feel long, and it didn't. It was, before I knew it was the end. I wasn't sort of looking at my watch or on my phone, and I wasn't shuffling around in my chair as my bottom got a bit sore by sitting for hours on end. So it not quite flew past, but it had the same sort of effect as Oppenheimer. Film. It didn't seem as long as its actual timing was. It was a great film, but I can't say it was a hugely enjoyable film.
No,
but it was a very good film.
You asked an interesting question, and what I'll ask you in tandem with that is, you've asked the question: has Martin Scorsese finally exhausted the subject of American violence in his new film Killers of the Flower Moon. Now, are you asking that question before you saw the film or afterwards?
Well, before I saw it, that's what I thought was going to happen. And it did in a way, because having made, I mean, he does make other films. I mean, Age of Innocence was actually a sort of like societal romance
Yes.
in the Age of Elegance. Wolf of Wall Street was a over the top comedy about corruption in Wall Street. He's made a film Tibet, Kundun. He's made One in Japan, Silence. So he doesn't just do films about American violence and American crime, but he has done an awful lot of films about American crime and American violence, and they're mostly brilliant. They're mostly classics. But I think Killers of the Flower Moon, which is set in 1920s Oklahoma, when the local indigenous Indian community struck oil in what was supposed to be a crap piece of land that they were forced onto by the newcomers in the new America. They strike oil and they become rich, and it's all about how unscrupulous, envious, greedy white Americans manipulate, exploit, and kill to get their hands on the oil money. So it could have been a straightforward, typical Scorsese of old American violence crime movie, but it's not. It's more like The Irishman was, that equally long film that he last made. And if The Irishman was basically one long apology for glamorizing violence and crime, Killers of the Flower Moon is one long apology for racism and political corruption and the evil that men do. It's like Scorsese's final shot at making up for all the times that he accidentally made crime and violence look glamorous, which he did, which is why watching Goodfellas is such good fun, which is why Taxi Driver is enjoyable, why Mean Street's enjoyable, because he accidentally makes crime and violence look like rock and roll. Well, The Irishman did not make crime and violence look like rock and roll. In Killers of the Flower Moon is very bleak in depicting bad people's behavior in modern America as having no redeeming features whatsoever. So it's a great film, but it's quite a stern film.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's three central performances. The talking points would invariably be Robert De Niro as the patriarchal figure. It turns out, I won't want to be a spoiler alert for any listeners, but the significance that he plays.
It's what he is.
There you are, the evil uncle.
The evil uncle, yeah.
So he's the evil uncle, and then of course Leonardo DiCaprio is his nephew.
He's
the very essence
nephew,
of redneck.
He's the weak. He's not quite a redneck. He's more a bit stupid. He's the weak, slightly stupid.
You're right. He is stupid, isn't he?
Greedy.
That's
nephew.
Right. It's not, yeah. But then, of course, and I think this is partly what makes this film so powerful, is the performance of Lily Gladstone. Lily is playing Molly Burkhart, and Molly Burkhart is one of the Osage County native Indian tribe members, and she marries the character played by Leonardo DiCaprio. And I think that's what I think makes this film so strong, is her story is told. You use that word stern, Graham. That's true. It's a very grave and serious film, very watchable within that. But there is absolutely that sense that there is, to call it a piece of apologia would I think be true, and with good reason. And I think the significance of Scorsese as a filmmaker is that if he makes this statement, it is hugely powerful. It'd be interesting to see Tarantino make any such such film with any such impact.
No, he did. Django Unchained was basically
it was
about the most fierce condemnation
of
Southern States of America and the slavery system and the treatment of black people that any Hollywood director's ever made. It was incredibly brutal in showing how horrible the slave system was. So the thing about Tarantino is that because his reputation, he doesn't get taken seriously. If Scorsese or someone else had made Django Unchained, it would have had a bigger sort of political impact. But Tarantino just isn't regarded as being that sort of director. Although I think part of him is, I think Tarantino's vast underrated as a, in the terms of the meaning of his films, he's always underrated. They're always taken as sort of like,
popcorn,
Pulp Fiction, literally Pulp Fiction, and I think he's better than that.
Yes. So Graham, and you make the point that the film is stern, and that's not to its detriment that you would be saying that. I mean,
it's not boring. You're never bored.
It absolutely is not boring, and it didn't feel like 3 hours 26 minutes that was dragging along. It was very intense throughout, which is quite some achievement to hold that for 3 hours 26 minutes. I mean, I love to see significant filmmakers still bringing something, and you can't say necessarily fresh to the table because you make the point about The Irishman, but I think this was as important and as significant a film as Scorsese has ever made. I would be interested to know what you thought of the finale, in which, so it turns it into being reminding us that it's a piece of storytelling. We have at the end, it's done as a recording with voices, with folio artists doing all the sound effects, and Scorsese himself playing the announcer. What did you read into that, Graham? Why is that, if you like, coda there?
I thought, first of all, it was a very effective gimmick. I thought it was a bit gimmicky because he has to sum up the story in a narration if he doesn't do that. And Scorsese doesn't do narration. So if he wasn't going to do narration, what's he going to do? Is he going to do a denouement where it's all on cards on screen with lots of factual information about what happened? Again, that's not really Scorsese.
No.
So he thought, how can I tell what happens next without going into elaborate, boring detail and using lots of words? And he thought, I'll turn it into a show on the radio. Now, you could say he was being clever by showing how, in America, how quickly real life terrible situations are turned into entertainment, which, of course, he made the same sort of point in Taxi Driver in 1976 and in The King of Comedy in 1983, was it? So he's made that point before. So that you could argue that. But I think he thought, how can I wrap this up after 3 hours, 26 minutes without using loads of words? So it did sort of work. My only feeling about that ending was that the film is watchable because no matter how bad DiCaprio's character is, he's such a great actor, you can't stop watching him.
Exactly.
And I think the film had to go back to DiCaprio's face at the end, and it didn't. It ended up with that radio play bit, followed by modern members of the Osage community dancing as if in celebration that they're still here in current times. And I think it had to go back to DiCaprio because eventually DiCaprio doesn't fess up properly, just as in The Irishman, De Niro doesn't fess up properly. These are two bad people who try desperately to be honest and redeem themselves and can't quite go the whole hog because it would destroy their own self-belief. And so I think it had to go back to DiCaprio. But I mean, how many films have I made? None. And Scorsese is a master of cinema. So therefore, I'm not going to tell Scorsese what to do.
I mean, I would draw maybe the comparison with the Schindler's List finale.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Where we suddenly get the modern day image. And I was always in two minds about that.
Yeah. I suppose it's a way of having a happy ending without it being a cliche, cheesy, sentimental happy ending. Because
that's what. I mean that's because the folio artist sequence, I thought was changing the tone of the film right at the finale. But as you say, he then did, as with Schindler's List, with the modern day Jewish community. Here we had the Osage tribe community, and maybe actually that gave it that gravitas. It's an interesting thought about, should we have had DiCaprio's face right at the end? How would you have done that?
Well, another reason he probably didn't do that is because ultimately it is about the story of the Osage community. It isn't about DiCaprio. DiCaprio is only one bad guy amongst a sea of bad guys who eventually met their fate to greater or lesser degrees. So I suppose to pay due respect to the subject matter, because it is based on a real story.
Yes, it is.
He had to focus on the Osage community. So I understand it from a dramatic point of view. the film seemed to hinge on DiCaprio, but the story is bigger than the film in some ways. So I suppose the ending reflected that.
Yeah. Well,
I did think one more thing. The one thing about the film that I didn't like, there's only one thing I didn't like really, was that early on in the film they spent a lot of time saying how smart and sharp the Osage community were.
Yes.
For the rest of the film, everybody in the Osage community, and including DiCaprio himself, were nothing but dumb. It's like they kept on not seeing the obvious and being manipulated, and I found that a bit annoying, because if they were that sharp, how did that story unfold the way it unfolded?
Yes,
but I don't know the real story, so perhaps that is what happened. But I thought that was a bit annoying, because when your protagonist, the main character in the film, is so stupid so many times, I was just getting slightly annoyed.
I think that's a fair and nice criticism, but overall, absolutely would encourage people to see this film. A toweringly important director, and always worth seeing Scorsese's work. And 3 hours 26 minutes of anyone's time, really well spent. Now,
I would say it's a better film than Oppenheimer. It's a better film than Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer was a very good film, but Scorsese is a better director than Christopher Nolan. So to judge it properly in the modern era, as opposed to like judging it against Scorsese's own lengthy CV, it was better than Oppenheimer as a film, I thought.
I would agree with that. On the, we was doing a link there, cheesy link with the word 3 for 3 hours, into 3 new albums, which is our last subject matter for today. I'm going to hold my hands up. I've yet to hear any of them. The first is the Coral, Sea of Mirrors. The second is Peter Brewis, Blowdry Colossus. The third is
Blowdry,
the Rolling Stones. I've got it down as being called Hackney Diamonds. I think you came up with a different title, but I'm pretty damn sure it's Hackney Diamonds. Their first album of original songs since a Bigger Bang in 2005. So now that's the one that's out this week, and it probably has attracted the most interest. But I would like to know, Graham, out of this, what has satisfied you the most? It would be fair to say that nothing against field music, but out of the 3, probably the field music, the one that perhaps least penetrative to a wider audience. The Coral is who've bubbled along, I think, in a delightful way through many years. The Rolling Stones, frankly, are the biggest band in the world. So good luck at comparing the 3. Over to you.
Well, the Stones, the great thing about the Stones' Hackney Diamonds album is it sounds fresh as a daisy and full of life and full of energy. And it sounds just as young in tone as the Coral, Sea of Mirrors, or Peter Bruce's Blowdry Colossus. The bad thing is, in terms of artistic interest, Hackney Diamonds is possibly the worst of the 3, because for a large part of the album, although it's performed exceedingly well and sounds brilliant, the songs are just full of loads of Stones recycled riffs we've heard a million times, and most of the tracks are album tracks. And I'm not surprised, because the last time the Stones did an album which had more than 5 tracks worth holding on to was Tattoo You in 1981. In general, they've produced a lot of albums which would make very good EPs, and Hackney Diamonds doesn't really rise above that, except at the end it redeems itself with 2 properly Rolling Stones tracks, which could have appeared at any time in the history and you would have been impressed. So Sweet Sounds of Heaven, which I thought should be the album title, it is an amazing track. If that turned up on Sticky Fingers or Exile Main Street, you wouldn't throw it out of bed. You'd think, that's a good track. And the last track, Rolling Stone Blues, the Muddy Waters cover, is so authentically bluesy, but in a Stones type way. It's just delightful. And those are the 2 moments where you go, wow, the Stones were a great group. The rest of the album is really professional and listenable, and to varying degrees quite good, but there's a lot of hackneyed, to use a terrible pun, there's a lot of hackneyed old stuff going on. So
it's not a diamond.
No, it's not a diamond, but considering they're 80 years old, I mean, Mick and Keith and Ron Wood's not far behind. You know, you wouldn't guess that this album was done by guys who are picking up the pension. It sounds like guys in their 30s or 40s. So in some ways, it's an amazing achievement.
So what about Peter Brewis, which we've sort of trailed before that Peter was doing this album. So this is Blowdry Colossus. I know we've only got about 90 seconds left, Graham.
Blowdry Colossus.
Sorry,
Blowdry. All instrumentals, very 1980s, amazing.
Yeah.
It's really, really much better than I thought it was going to be, because it's all instrumentals and very 1980s influenced. The Coral Sea of Mirrors, though, is the gem. The Coral Sea of Mirrors, which is a semi-acoustic, semi-orchestral, pastoral, psych rock album, is phenomenally good. It's as good as it's nearly as good as Love's Forever Changes from 1967.
Gosh, high praise, Graham.
It's not quite as good, but close. And it's as good as the Zombies, Odyssey and Oracle from the late 60s. Yeah. It's a very, very good album. The choral have learned so much by being together for more than 20 years, and they just slowly get better and better. They've really got their teeth into how you do great songs. It's really impressive, Sea of Mirrors.
So that would be your recommendation of the album to get at the moment, Sea of Mirrors by The Coral?
Definitely, yes.
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic Sub production.